Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and around the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m, broadcasting on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Welcome to people viewing throughout the United Kingdom and around the world. We've got a good show lined up for you. We have got a guest today at the bottom of the hour at 7:30. We're going to be welcoming the one and only Ashley, who is also known as that Preston journalist, and he's going to be on with us for 20 minutes, and we're going to be talking about, of course, the local elections, which are tomorrow, which give us here in Scotland a once in a 5-year opportunity to purge the Sturge. Tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, we have an opportunity to purge the Sturge, or at least to purge the Sturgeon's party from the council offices throughout Scotland. And let's seize that opportunity. Let's do this, folks, okay? It simply means us getting out and voting tomorrow and changing the balance of the council offices throughout Scotland. We have to purge the Sturge. That is to say, we have to purge the Sturgeon's party from power, because they are the bane of Scotland at this precise time. And we're going to be talking about just how much of a bane they are in a few moments after we've said hello to some of the folk who are coming in. Please send us your comments, folks, and please do send us any questions that you've got. And if you've got any questions for Ashley, please send them in when Ashley's on, and we'll be asking him about them as well. So hi to Debbie. Happy hump day to everyone, by which is meant Wednesday because it's at the hump of the week. Hi to Tommy. Good evening, Tommy. And to Frankie. Good evening to Frankie and to Kenny from East Kilbride. And to David. Good to hear from you, David. And to Catherine. Where are you all calling from, folks? We know we've got at least one viewer from East Kilbride anyway. Adam says, tomorrow we purge the Sturge. Tomorrow we remain united as one and divided by none. And Bob says, Alistair, that's some very dodgy synthesized trumpet music in your intro. Annabelle says, get them out, get the SNP out of power, because we've had them in power in Scotland for long enough. Good evening to Alan Bell, who's watching from Greenock, where unfortunately the Scottish National Party launched their so-called manifesto to mess up Scotland just last week or so. And Greenock did not deserve that, I must say. Greenock's a lovely part of the country. Lynn has heard that people from Ukraine who've been here for 2 months can vote tomorrow. I'm not entirely sure of that, but I do know that it's residency. You can just vote if you live here. I don't know if there's a time that you've got to be resident here for. If there's not, then indeed you might be correct, but I don't know about that. But certainly it's based on residency in Scotland, not based on citizenship, unfortunately, as it used to be. But that's just unfortunate and wrong, of course. And to Ali, who's watching from the great British city of Inverness, and that's a really nice profile pic. I like that. The lion rampant in red, white and blue colours. That's a good one. That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, James, hi. Now, yes, let's talk about tomorrow just very briefly. The polls will be open from 7 until 10. Please do go along. You don't need your polling card. If you've lost your polling card, you don't need to take it with you. But if you've got it, please do take it along with you, along with a pen, which I always take along as well, although you're provided with a pencil at the polling station. And I'm only speaking here about Scotland, but in Scotland we're voting under a system called single transferable vote, which means you vote with numbers in order of your preferred candidates. So you put a 1 beside your favourite candidate, and if that could be all that you do if you want, but if you want to continue voting, you can put a 2 beside your second favourite, a third, and then a fourth and a fifth, and so on. But you do not have to vote more than once if you don't want to. Furthermore, you must vote by numbers. Just by ticking or crossing will not be allowed. Your vote will be considered null and void if it's counted and you've crossed it or you've ticked it in Scotland. That will be considered null and void. So you have to vote in Scotland in numerical order, 1, 2, 3, 4. But you do not have to vote for everybody. And of course, we always say, and this is so important, do not vote for the SNP, the Greens, or ALBA. Okay, leave them blank, because if you give them any number at all, even if it's your last choice, it does amount to you having voted for them. And in a worst situation, it could actually that vote could actually get them elected. So only vote for the pro-UK parties in order, 1, 2, 3. And do not mark your vote with a cross or a tick. It has to be in numerical order. So that's tomorrow. So please, let's get out and let's change the constituency of these council offices, because the more councils that are pro-SNP, then the more councils will join with Sturgeon next year if she attempts to force through an illegal referendum. But if there's pro-UK controlled councils, they will not support her effort to promote a pro-UK. They will not support her effort to break up the United Kingdom with an illegal referendum. So we have to get as many councils in Scotland which are unionist or pro-UK in some way or another. We have got to get the SNP and their Greens and their ALBA allies out. That is so important. And how well will we do? We don't know. There's various people are saying that the SNP is not likely to move forward, that it might stand still, that it might actually fall back. All will be revealed by the weekend, of course, but we have to do our bit, which is to get out and to vote tomorrow, and even vote for parties that you might have to hold your nose for. Kat says, hello from Kilmarnock. Keep up the good work. We certainly will, Kat. And thanks for saying so. Nathan says, hello from Shetland. Fantastic. And Arnie does not have a high opinion of Nicola Sturgeon. And indeed, he points out, and Frankie says, Scottish independence is nonsense and madness. Scotland is British. Now, somebody there suggested that Nicola Sturgeon was a dictator. Well, that brings us on very nicely to the point that I wanted to make, to run through very briefly for you in preparation for purging the Sturge tomorrow, a litany of failure and a litany of dangerous things which the Scottish National Party is and has been and will continue to do to our wonderful nation of Scotland. And the first thing about the SNP is its overall general incompetence, which is almost the least of it, to be quite frank. But you only have to look at the ferry debacle to see the absolute incompetence of that, and especially lately, of course, the census catastrophe. Now, England and Wales had their census last year, and they got 97% of people participating in it. So it was a big success in England and Wales. But of course, because that was the rest of the United Kingdom, the SNP have to do absolutely everything differently. So they couldn't hold it at the same time, even though it made perfect sense to hold it at the same time, because if you held it at the same time, you would get the benefit of all the publicity that was being generated in the mass media and on the television and radio and social media channels talking about this big census. But no, the SNP, of course, because of their identity politics, they have to be different, and they have to wait an entire year before they hold it. And by the time that comes around, everybody's forgotten about a census, and they don't have the power to be able to promote the census in the way that the British government promoted it in England and Wales. And so everything has just turned into a catastrophe, which now means that there are at least 700,000 people in Scotland who have not filled in the census. Okay, which means that the census as it currently stands is absolutely useless, because that's a massive amount of the population. Now, I was looking at some information here about that, and this is from the National last week, and it says the figures show that in Glasgow there's only 65% of people, 65.5% of people have actually filled it in. That was last week. So that's almost 35% of people. That's over a third of people have not filled it in Glasgow, which means when you get these statistics, you're missing a third of the population. So the statistics are absolutely, essentially useless for you. And of course, what this means is they have to extend the census, which means more money is going to be going into it. And we couldn't say it any better than a fantastic article which appeared in the Scotsman last week by Brian Wilson. And I'll just read out what he says here. He says, the whole point of a census day is to provide a snapshot of society on a specific date, not spread over 3 months. It worked in Scotland for 200 years until the SNP got their hands on it. Then everything had to be different, just to remind us that this is Scotland's census, rather than a boring old UK one, which achieved near total participation in the past. He goes on, like everything our devolved government touches, Scotland's census was built on difference. Different date, different branding, different methodology, different questions, all of which detracted from the unifying sense of purpose, which was an essential element to the census. The unifying sense of purpose. That's the last thing the SNP wanted, if that meant a unifying UK sense of purpose. Unsurprisingly, says Wilson, doing it differently meant doing it worse. Not least because awareness was diluted by a Scotland-only exercise. And he concludes, making such a mess of running the census may not be the stuff of headlines, but it is another reminder that just occasionally unity of purpose across the state we live in, by which he means Britain, should take precedence over the unproductive search for identity-based difference. Absolutely well said, sir. Absolutely well said. But just more incompetence, utter incompetence of the Scottish National Party. And then you've got misusing public funds. Now you could also relate that back to the incompetence of the ferry debacle. But lately, what they've been doing is they've been using public funds, we were presuming it's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds to get a branch of the British civil service based here in Scotland to promote the case for a second referendum. And they've received legal advice about whether or not this referendum is likely to go ahead, but they're not releasing that legal advice, even though the even though the Scottish Information Commissioner said disclosing some of the advice would, quote, significantly enhance public debate on this issue. But the SNP do not and have not disclosed it, and they're certainly not going to disclose it before tomorrow, because if that advice says that you don't have a hope of having a referendum in 2023, then what that means is that all these tens of thousands and all these hundreds of thousands of pounds which the SNP is using to try to promote a referendum in 2023 is essentially a waste of money, a waste of our money completely. So it was one of the Lib Dems who said last week, I think the public would be appalled if the government were wasting taxpayers' money pressing ahead with their plans if there was legal advice suggesting they don't have a leg to stand on. Okay, well, we are already appalled by that. So they're not only misusing public funds, but there's this whole culture of secrecy which they have. And it was Anas Sarwar who tore into them last week as well. Sarwar tears into SNP's culture of secrecy, where he's talking about things like that, and he said the culture of, quote, secrecy and cover-up was at risk of undermining Scotland's democracy, quote, infecting wider public life, and also calling into question the professionalism of the civil service. This whole culture of secrecy, they think they can get away with it. Calling into question, says Sarwar, the professionalism of the civil service. Well, let's talk about the civil service, okay? Another thing that's wrong with the SNP is that basically they and the civil service are far too chummy. You've heard this phrase, in bed with each other. Well, basically the SNP and the branch of the civil service, the branch of the British civil service that works in Scotland is far too chummy with their bosses. And we have proof of this as well. Civil servants too close to SNP government. It says government, but as we know, it's actually just an administration. Anyway, they like to call themselves that. And what this article points out is that fears have been raised that Scotland's civil service is becoming politicised. Okay. It already is, under the SNP's rule, as it emerged that officials, that is, civil servant officials, have not lodged formal objections to ministers' spending decisions for 15 years. Unlike in Westminster, where records show that ministerial directions which are requested by senior civil servants when they have concerns over a policy have been sought more than 100 times in Whitehall since 1990. So in the Westminster Parliament, the civil service down there have complained about various things to the government more than 100 times since 1990. But here in Scotland, there has been no complaints by any civil servant officials to the Scottish administration for 15 years. Okay, that's messed up. They've asked some professor here of government and public policy for his opinion, and he said possible explanations for this is a limited mindset within the Scottish civil service, a deficit of quality among senior officials, or politicisation. It is possibly a combination of all those things, he said. Quote, in terms of politicisation, the concern is that the administrative culture inside the Scottish government is pro-nationalist. Well, you don't have to be an academic to have figured that one out. Now, let's continue, of course. We started this talk about the SNP and its quote-unquote dictatorial tendencies. Well, that's very much a case. That's very much a case that the SNP does have totalitarian tendencies. And my goodness me, we've seen that in the last 2 years. What has the COVID lockdown been, if not an unbelievable exercise in totalitarian control of the population? We've seen masking as a form of social control, which Nicola Sturgeon does not want to give up on, because she likes all her gimps and minions to be running around at her command, masked and subservient to her. She's loving that. She's not going to give that up, well, although she's been forced to basically give it up by circumstances for the moment. So we've got masking. We've got her suggesting that we can't even leave Scotland. You know, she didn't have the political power to do that. But remember when she was saying you couldn't go to Manchester, you couldn't cross the border? She had no political power to do that. She was just relying, hopefully, on people being obedient to her. She's very much the Scottish National Party has been promoting the interests of big pharma corporations. When the state and corporations join together to promote a particular agenda, there's a special word for that, of course. I'm sure many of you know it begins with F. But they have been, the SNP, and to an extent the other political parties as well, of course, have been highly complicit in promoting the interests of big pharma corporations. And straight away, once they bring in the state, once they bring in corporations to basically help govern the state, then you've got totalitarianism on the way as well. And lastly, but not leastly, with the present coronavirus bill that's going through Holyrood, they have got a paragraph in there which will allow them to make decisions without Holyrood's approval, without even taking it in front of Parliament. And this is called a Henry VIII clause. Huge backlash over SNP plan to claim Henry VIII crisis powers. The reference to Henry VIII is due to the fact that he made a law back in 1539 which allowed him basically to do that kind of thing. And ever since then, it's been called a Henry VIII clause. And they're still at it. A few days ago, SNP is urged to rethink its Henry VIII powers bill. The legislation would enable her, it says here, her, by which they mean Sturgeon, to close schools, enforce stay-at-home restrictions and shut hospitality venues beyond the COVID crisis without having to seek parliamentary approval. All of this is going through Holyrood right now, and unfortunately it will get passed because the Green Gimps will go along with it, because it pays very well for them to do so. So we just have to be conscious of that, the rising totalitarianism of the SNP. And related to that, finally, is of course their anti-free speech agenda, which they have. We campaigned strongly against that last year when it was being brought through Parliament, and unfortunately they got it through. Huge changes which basically can clamp down on freedom of speech. And I was pleasantly shocked to read this incredible article actually in The National. Elon Musk's Twitter bid is a reminder of the importance of free speech, and that, believe it or not, is from Joanna Cherry, who is an SNP MP, and she is actually on our side, it seems, as far as freedom of expression and speech is concerned, which you would think that's unusual for a Scottish nationalist to actually believe in free speech, but it looks like there is one that actually does. And in fact, she says here she attended the launch of the Free Speech Union in Scotland as a member of its advisory council, which is quite remarkable. The Free Speech Union has opened a Scottish office due to overwhelming demand from Scottish members concerned that free speech is under threat in Scotland. Well, we're concerned, and we know that it is. Many are particularly worried about the chilling effect of the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act when it is brought into force. There is also considerable concern about potential threats to free speech online. And she quotes somebody here: at the Free Speech Union launch, the Scottish poet and my fellow advisory council member Jenny Lindsay said, quote, in nearly 20 years of programming and writing in Scottish literary culture, I have never known an atmosphere so stifled, nor the precepts of freedom of expression so disregarded by individual writers and arts organisations alike. This does not need to be the case, and I dearly hope for robust discussion about re-energising Scotland's literary landscape so that writers and thinkers are free to explore complex contemporary issues without fears of no platforming, ostracisation, smearing and loss of livelihood. Crikey. The situation, says Cherry, which she describes, pertains not only in the literary world but also in politics, universities, public bodies and charities. It is not healthy. So this is the Scottish state restricting freedom of speech and freedom of expression, among lots of other things that it's doing. Well, people of Scotland, please, you have a chance tomorrow to at least change the makeup of many of our council offices. The council offices that are responsible for so much of what goes on in our daily lives. And so please do take the opportunity to go and vote for any of the pro-UK parties, but please do not vote SNP or their subservient allies, the Greens and Alba. Leave those boxes blank. Just vote for any of the pro-UK parties of your choice in numerical order in Scotland. Now, we've got our guest, I see, has come into the studio, but I'm going just to say to the guest, we'll have you on in about 5 minutes, because before that, I'm just going to run through this day in British history, because we'll have a competition coming up as well. So before we get to our guest, which is Ashley, that Preston journalist, let's look at on this day in British history, because British history matters. British history matters. And it was on, I'll ask you a question as well about this, and send the answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk. Now, on this day in British history, it was the 4th of May in 1904, when two skilled gentlemen, one an electrical engineer and builder of motor cars, and another a seller and repairer of motor cars, got together, and they decided to build the best motor car in the world. And they signed an agreement that they would produce the best that would ever be known. And one of them was called Mr. Charles Rolls, and the other was called Mr. Henry Royce. And fate would have it that they got together and invented the Rolls Royce. And we've got a nice picture of a Rolls Royce right there. That's a Rolls Royce Ghost. Look at that, eh? That's in my garage, just out the back there. It's not actually in my garage, I'm only kidding. I quite like it to be in my garage though. And so, okay, they got together, and well, the rest is history. And of course, but like all British companies, like all good British companies, it of course had to get sold off to a bunch of foreigners who now enjoy the, no doubt, the money that rolls in from it. And why did it get sold off? Well, because our governments tend just to be useless as far as those sort of things are concerned. Anyway, at least the name still exists, and they're still being manufactured in the UK, down in West Sussex, just outside the Goodwood racing circuit. Now, another thing that happened on this day 6 years ago was this was the day before the Scottish election in 2016. And I got wind about 11 o'clock in the morning that Nicola Sturgeon was going to be on the Buchanan Gallery steps at the top of Buchanan Galleries. And I happened to live just a few minutes away from there at that time. I used to live just a few minutes away, and I thought, I've got to do something, because I was the director of A Force for Good. Nicola Sturgeon was going to be in my city, attempting to pretend that my city was welcoming her. So I thought, I've got to get down there, and I've got to just see what I can possibly do. So I grabbed one of my Union Jacks, put it inside a black plastic bag, and the rest is history. Here's the video of me. There's Nicola Sturgeon just blethering away, and I just pushed through the crowd. Not that there was much of a crowd, it was just photographers. Pushed through the photographers and created a scene. And look at this guy trying to take that off. Oh, see you, mate. He tried to nick that from me. Like, what a. And so I offered it to Nicola, and she saw that I was doing that. And I have to say, the police were totally sleeping on the job, because I'm standing about, looking like Travis Bickle, basically, with this thing in a black bin liner. And I was standing there for about an hour before she came along, and the two dozy policemen, they never clocked me or anything. Let's watch that again. It was so funny. Let's watch that again. She's just come up. She just grabbed the microphone there, and she's like, oh, catches me. She's like, uh-oh. And others are like, uh-oh. And there I go. And you see, what she thought she would do is that, look at all these people behind her. It was so arranged. They tried to make it look spontaneous, but of course they had planned it. And there was nobody there, of course, other than me and a bunch of photographers. But boy, did that pay off, because the next day it was on the front of the Herald, it was on the front of the Scotsman, on the front of the Times. Look at that, Sturgeon set to make history as rivals clash. That was the next day. So I totally ruined their optics. Okay, they were trying to pretend that Glasgow was for them, and I got a big Union Jack right there in her face. And the Getty photographer who took that, he said it was his second favourite photograph of that year. So that was some good activism. That was 6 years ago today, on the eve of the Scottish 2016 election. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to ask, the question is, what's the question? And the prize, right? Look, check this out. This is the prize, folks. Please do. It's a 70th, the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. It says 1952 to 2022, and it's a enamel badge, and that'll be winging its way to the first person who sends in the right answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk. Now, if you've never done it before, please do try, because it's really worth your while. The question is, today, 4th of May in 1904, two engineers got together and agreed to build a great British car. What would be its name? If you've never tried it before, just send an email to contact@aforceforgood.uk and you could be a winner. Now let's get Ashley in. Ashley is that Preston journalist. Please, folks, say hello and welcome Ashley.
Evening, Alistair, you well?
I'm well, Ashley. Thanks very much for coming on tonight. Sorry I kept you waiting there for 5 minutes. But how are things in your neck of the woods at the moment?
You've been pretty good.
Yeah, you've been doing some fantastic work on Twitter. I noticed you've got a programme tomorrow evening. What's that about?
Yeah, just last minute. just decided to do it. I thought it's the election time, isn't it? And there's elections taking place pretty much everywhere. Ironically, not in my area, but pretty much everywhere else. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'd just do a little bit of a chat on it tomorrow at 6:30. If anybody wishes to join, if you want to come on yourself, you're more than welcome. We can maybe do something.
Well, absolutely. Please keep in touch with me about that. I might have a few words to say about what's happening in Scotland. How long are you? It's at 6:30. Did you say?
Yeah, 6:30 till 7:30.
Right.
So we'll basically go through the lead up to these elections, what we think is going to happen in these elections, similar to what we're doing now, of course. Speculating what we think will happen anyway.
Yes. And well, to give you my very brief thoughts, I think I doubt that the SNP will make much headway. I would like to see them either remain static or ideally fall back. Basically, there's the Labour Party have been running quite a good campaign. And what the Labour Party want to do is to take votes away, obviously, from because they've lost support in the past to Tories, but they've also lost support to SNP. So they're hoping at this election to get back the Tory votes, the people who left Labour and had voted Tory, plus some of the SNP people, and they're hoping that they'll capitalise upon what's perceived by some to be a poor showing by Boris Johnson. What's in England? What's the kind of situation that how do you see it?
Well, the Tories are briefing out down here that they're expecting to lose about 800 seats. So my theory is that they're going to lose about 400 to 500, and then they can turn round for a PR point of view and say that's not a bad result, especially for a government that's had to deal with such tasks. That's what they'll say anyway, I think. And I think as far as Labour go, certainly UK-wide, Keir Starmer, and by extension, of course, Anas Sarwar, they've got to be looking to gain at least 1,000 to 1,200 to make it look like a convincing victory. Otherwise, Keir Starmer's not going to look very good, especially when Labour, they're a few points ahead in the polls. The government, let's face it, haven't done very well recently. It's been one mess up to another, hasn't it? The only thing they've really got right, I suppose, is you could say the Ukraine situation, because it's made Boris look quite statesman-like. But look at Labour at the moment. Keir Starmer now finds himself in massive trouble with this £200 curries and whatnot. So I honestly think there's a chance for some of the smaller parties, especially down south here anyway, to take some council seats.
That's an interesting thought. When you say smaller parties, what ones would you be thinking about?
Well, I suppose the most prominent of your small, like fledgling parties, if you will, people like Reform, who have certainly got quite a big name. It's just that nobody will vote for them because they don't want to let a Labour or a Tory MP in, as the first past the post system, which this isn't, of course. Yeah. And maybe even something like the SDP, who are quite popular in certain quarters of the country, but very, very limited reach.
That's interesting. That we've got. I think there's one or two SDP. That's to say, Social Democratic Party. I think there was one or two maybe standing in Scotland, but I think they're slightly bigger in England. It'd be interesting if any of them got in. Talking about. Well, Nathan there says, Ashley, really like your Sturgeon videos, holding her to account and doing what the mainstream media should be doing. Well, that's a good point. It's a pity the media won't touch her, isn't it? Although I must say there's been a bit of a turn in the tide recently, I think, where the media actually are now scrutinising a bit, maybe not the BBC and stuff, but certainly some of the other, especially like the written press and things. I think they are scrutinising her a bit more, especially when it comes to the ferry fiasco and things like that. I think they are actually scrutinising a little bit more, and I think the pressure's certainly showing on her face. Oh, that's true. I mean, something's showing on her face certainly, and it could be the pressure. She's as you say, she probably is getting pushed a little bit more after having a free ride for all these years. Basically, the ferry debacle is, while on its face it's as boring as you get, really. I mean, as I've said before, ferries are the most boring of the vessel family, but at least it it's like one of these wee things that's just constantly irritating her and constantly niggling on her. And she's in the wrong on this. There's no question about it. There's really no good end for her on this. She's just hoping that it will somehow roll over. And things like all this promising another referendum and so on. That's in a way is also to get people's eye off the ball, get the media concentrated on something else. Rather.
Well, look at it at first. She said in Holyrood herself, when she was backed into the tightest of corners eventually, that the book stops with her. But then in the next breath, she tried to blame that disgraced Derek Mackay. And then she tried to blame Jim McCall. And she's gone through all these people. It turns out now that none of them were responsible because they've all got alibis for being in certain places at certain times and whatnot. And Derek Mackay now is even going to attend a committee, isn't he, and speak in Holyrood against Nicola Sturgeon. Because he wasn't even in the country at the time, it turns out. He was on holiday.
Right. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Well, that should be fun. That should be absolutely fun. Yeah. Well, talking about smaller parties that stand a potential chance of getting elected, there is one. I've looked. There's not that many small parties standing in Scotland at all. However, there is one fellow standing for something called the British Unionists. Vote number 1, John Joe Leckie, and he's standing in the Fortisset ward, which is in North Lanarkshire, and there's a very good chance, I've heard on the grapevine, that he will get elected, and it's a very good chance he's going to beat the SNP person, and it would be absolutely turn up for the books, and the media would be like, who on earth is this guy? But it looks like he probably will get elected. Touch wood.
Yeah, and absolutely, yeah.
And it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting party. British Unionists for a Better Britain. And that particular ward is a ward where that message could do very well. So fingers crossed for the British Unionists. That's the actual name of the party, British Unionists, which I think is a great name.
I've never heard of them, but good luck to all of them. I good luck to him, definitely.
Yeah, BritishUnionist.org, I notice, is the website. Somebody sent me this, which is fantastic. So, yeah, there might well be, but we totally emphasise the importance of councils because it's councils which can do all the absurd politically correct things. The removal of statues, the removal of street names, the desecration of heritage, doing down the British history. All of that's council level. That's all councils that are doing that. It's not the government. It's not even the Scottish administration. It's Edinburgh Council, it's Glasgow Council, it's town councils throughout England as well doing it. So it's at that council level that kind of ideological revolution can actually happen. So people say it's all about getting the bins collected, and that would certainly be nice, and getting the gutters cleared, which I've given up on. I mean, I've given up on Glasgow ever cleaning the road gutters. I think they're just going to pile high until like 2000 and 2,500 sort of thing, and we'll all just get drowned under all this dust and dirt. But certainly councils are for doing that, but they're also an ideological level, and they can just desecrate, they can just bulldoze city squares, they can just take down buildings, they can do all that sort of stuff. All that ideological stuff is all done at the council level. So if you oppose that sort of desecration, you've got to get out and vote against it. And the safest thing to do is to vote for the pro-UK parties, and do not vote for SNP, Greens or Alba, who are the worst of these revolutionaries.
I would also say I'm not saying don't vote Labour, but watch out as well, because Labour have got pro-independence candidates standing under their banner as well, especially in places like Edinburgh. If you're in Edinburgh, watch out, because there are many pro-independence Labour candidates standing there. So if you're a Labour voter, fair enough, but do check the candidate as well if you're a unionist, and make sure that the people you're voting for actually support the UK and don't actually support independence on the side, because I think there was at least 25 candidates who were standing for Labour in various places that actually support independence. As you said, it's Labour trying to recoup the losses they had to the Tories and to the SNP. So it's their way of trying to win round some of these former Labour voters that now support the SNP.
Possibly. I can't comment on that, other than to say I know that Anas Sarwar, the leader, is very much pro pro-UK, whether he's been able to maintain that discipline throughout the rest of his party is up for question, of course, and he'll need to maintain that discipline going forward. But you're right, you've always got to watch out for candidates if you don't really know fully who they are all about. Ashley says, Adam, did you know that if you're against the SNP or Indie Ref 2, you're anti-democracy and anti-Scottish?
Then I guess I am the most anti-democratic, anti-Scottish person you'll ever meet. Despite the fact that I respect the result of the Brexit referendum and the Scottish independence referendum.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And
I'm going to say... go on, sorry.
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, you were on about before how people voting tomorrow about what the councils actually do to affect your lives. And a lot of people don't... she's been putting this stupid message out, Sturgeon, saying, send a message to Boris Johnson. And if there are any nationalists watching this, just remember, if you vote an SNP councillor, Boris Johnson couldn't give a damn. He probably won't even realise it's not affecting Westminster in the slightest if you vote an SNP councillor in. They couldn't care less. And as you rightly said, Alistair, a lot of these councils have a lot more power over you than the national governments do or the national devolved administrations do. Because a lot of what the councils do affect you directly, as you said, with bin collections and things like that, gutter cleaning, whatever. Whereas what the national government do doesn't always affect you that much.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's like all these wars that the government get into. I mean, none of those affect me in the slightest, Yeah. And it's from the point of view of an international scenario, it's all very important, etc., etc. But it's not. It's what affects me when I walk out is the state of the gutters. Did I mention the gutters in the roads out there? By the way, I think I did. They've been like that for and they get worse every year because the leaves, just turn into mud, and then the mud compacts, and anyway, that's what affects me. I'm afraid wars in Eastern Europe will be going on for centuries to come.
Yeah, of course they will.
I've got enough to worry about. I've got enough to concern myself about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Derek says, I stand with my fellow British family, the Scots, the Welsh, the English, the Ulstermen. We are kinsmen and have fought and lived together for centuries. Amen to that. Amen to that, Derek.
He's absolutely right. And I think, as well, the tide has really turned on this... Oh, my camera's gone off, hasn't it? The tide has really turned on this... There we go. The tide's really turned on the independent cause a lot, I think, as well. Because there's bigger things for people to worry about. Maybe at one time it was very popular, I'll grant you that. In places like Arborough, for example, at one time they used to have tens of thousands of people going to these rallies. And I think it was you yourself that put out the figures recently at the latest rally, less than 700 turned up or something. People are focusing on things such as putting food on the table, having a job and things like that. They're not focusing on now trying to break away from the oldest alliance in the world. Yeah.
Oh, well, 100%. That's how normal people behave. There's still quite a few slightly abnormal people who write into the national newspaper and provide my daily amusement, I have to say. And because I was just, before I came on, I was just looking to see if there was any letters that needed to be mentioned, and of course there's plenty of stuff, and they're always concerned about us unionists being subservient, apparently. And there's actually a letter. This was in yesterday's National. Was it yesterday's? No, it was Friday's. Talking about, and both letters mention subservience and how we're subservient. These people are I think they're projecting or something like that. And then somebody else going on, it takes it all back to how the fact that the union began without the people of Scotland ever being asked. But again, somebody who completely ignores the fact that we were asked in 2014. They completely ignore that fact. And they're still annoyed that we weren't asked in 1707. But they avoid noticing that we've been asked at every British general election since, and also in 2014. So the crazy kind of mentality.
Look at the polling as well. It's completely against them now. I haven't seen a poll that's pro-independence for it must be a couple of months at least. It's completely against, the tide has completely turned. And if you notice, every time something happens, the SNP try to use it as an excuse not to hold the next referendum. For example, when the Ukraine-Russia situation started, they said, oh, due to that, we're not going to hold it next year now. And some of the straddling support decided to kick off about that, and then they came out and said, oh, we will do. And now they're trying to do it again. You know, it's absolute madness. They're never going to hold a referendum. People just need to get that into their heads.
Yes, and especially if they do badly tomorrow, if they lose control over certain councils, then, as I keep saying, what that'll mean is that they won't even be able to have an illegal referendum, because there'll be councils, pro-UK councils, who won't stand for it, who won't allow their election office to be involved in such an illegal thing. We have to presume that the SNP councils will go ahead with it, but so long as we've got a significant majority, or significant number anyway, of pro-UK councils, then she's not going to get an illegal referendum, even if she passed a law that she was going to do it. And the whole referendum thing, though, has to be put into perspective. What she's trying to do is basically get turned down by Boris Johnson next year, who'll say you cannot have it. She'll take it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will say you cannot have it because it's not law, but that'll be by the end of that year, by the beginning of 2024, there'll be all this kicking off in the Supreme Court, and that will be all the media will be talking about. And then in May 2024, there might be a general election. Yeah. Although, actually, now that I say it, now that they've changed that fixed term parliaments, it could actually be later on in that year, and at the very latest, I think it's January 2025, they can actually hold a general election at the very latest. Just because the dateline has been jigged about now because of the changing the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Right, so, I thought it had to be, 2019. Was it December the 18th or 19th we had the general election?
Yes.
I thought it had to be 5 years to that date.
Yes, plus a couple of months to do with something like the because Parliament closes down or something like that. So it actually gives you another month or 6 weeks or something like that that you can add on. So the very latest, I believe, is January 2025 when they could actually hold it. So you could be looking at a general election in 2024. But she's just going to keep this running all through 2024, so that by the time the general election comes around, she'll have annoyed enough Scottish people, in her view, in order to get people voting for her.
It's all they've got, though, isn't it? How long can you keep on with the same old tired and tested lines and expect people to keep following you? I mean, some will, I suppose, but the majority won't, and the majority never have, obviously. It's just that, unfortunately, there don't seem to be enough unionist voters getting to the ballot boxes. I would implore anybody tomorrow, if you don't think that, it doesn't matter, it's a council election, it matters. Get to those ballot boxes, because I guarantee you now, the SNP supporters that are still loyal to them will be at those ballot boxes. So you need to be there as well to send a strong message. And I think, going back to your original point as well, they could, I hope it's not just wishful thinking, they could be in for a bit of a shock. They've isolated parents with their disgusting questionnaires. They've isolated working people by, let's say, increasing benefits and giving basically no COVID support out and spending it on allegedly indie ref preparations and things like that. What more do they have to do to annoy the average person in the streets?
Yeah, exactly. This is a good time, as you say, you summed that up very well. This is a good time to get out there and just show that you're not happy with what's been happening. Ashley, that's 20 minutes has gone by very quickly. We've been flashing up all this time your twitter.com address, which is that address there, /AKWriting88, and also your youtube.com address. If you simply search for that Preston journalist on YouTube, you'll find Ashley's videos, and you're doing them basically almost like one a day now, certainly 2 or 3, 4 or 5 a week it seems. You do very well on that, and congratulations, and they get good views, and you've got, your subscribers are doing very well also. So we look to you to try to learn actually how to do YouTube in that sense, because you're knocking it out the park with your very short videos. We're more sort of long form in a sense, but very good, Ashley. Thank you very much.
Can I just say one more thing before I go?
Go ahead, please.
I'll just say, when you go to the ballot boxes tomorrow, for a start, please go. Secondly, reiterating what Alistair said before, remember, single transferable vote, you do not have to number every box. Only number the boxes from the unionist parties that you'd like to see elected. Do not number a single ALBA, SNP, Green box. And look out for the independents. Make sure they're pro-UK before you number the boxes. Don't number a single box of someone you wouldn't want to see elected. And vote UK on the 5th of May.
Well said. Absolutely. I totally second that emotion. Ashley, thanks very much. I'll be in touch after the programme, but possibly appearing on your show tomorrow from 6:30 or thereabouts. But we'll speak later about that. In the meantime, thanks very much. Okay, take care.
Thanks, Alistair. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
See ya. Fantastic, Ashley. That Preston journalist. Well done, Ashley, says Tommy, and Kathleen says, thanks, Ashley, great programmes. Kenny says, cheers, Ashley, and Nathan says, cheers, Ashley, as does David. Thank you, Ashley. PBC says, thanks. Alan says, great stuff, Ashley. Ashley's got a lot of support here, which is wonderful to know. A great fellow. Harry says, what a great listen. Thank you, Harry. That's nice. That's our aim. Michael says, thank you. Very informative. Now, somebody asked that, we have a winner. We have a winner of the question. Now, the question was, on this day in 1984, two gentlemen got together and decided to create one of the greatest cars the world has ever known. And what was the name of the car? And the answer was Royce. And the winner will receive this little badge, and it's Anthony Steventon. Well done. Well done. So this will be on its way to you tomorrow. Thank you. Now, somebody said there in the comments, what's this little badge that I'm wearing and where can you get it? Well, you can get it. It's this little AFFG badge. It's $4.99 and it's at our shop, which is a force for good. There you go. Now, you'll also get that free if you're a union supporter, okay? If you are donating monthly from £5 upwards at our union supporters page, then you'll get that free. And if you are donating £10 or more, then you'll get a wee book and a badge free. And if you're donating £15 or more a month, you'll get a wee book, a badge, and a flag free. In other words, you'll get the full Boona. So, our union supporters, great program, and folks, it's what keeps us going, because if we don't have the stuff coming in, we can't cover our fixed costs. We cannot cover the cost of having somebody on TikTok all the time, or of having somebody on Instagram all the time, of having somebody on Facebook all the time, of somebody doing all our video editing, and another person doing all our graphic design. So we have a team of 6 people, and they are all professionals, and we need help. And so that's through our Union Supporters Programme, and we will be out on the streets again. More about that next week when we're there. And before we finish, I wanted to play a Neil Oliver video, okay? And we're going to play this because it just says it so well. Let's put up Neil Oliver right now.
It's no accident that our past, our shared past, is being used as the stick with which to beat us. To seek to do as much is a well-worn tactic. If a people can be made ashamed of the figures from their past, those who by their efforts and endeavours brought us to where we are today, then the moral legitimacy of the present is undermined and then destroyed. It is in this way that those of us who take pride in Britain and Britishness are made to keep our heads down and to shut up. Today is St George's Day, of course. St George, patron saint of England, was from territory we now know as Turkey. He died in Palestine and is also the patron saint chosen by the people of Georgia, the Lithuanians, the Maltese, the Portuguese and the Venetians. He was a Christian martyr, but most clearly he stands for the necessity to face adversity in defence of the innocent and helpless. Symbols matter, and as a symbol, George is a good one. I like to see all of the patron saints remembered and celebrated. Andrew, Patrick and David too. I'm a Scot, but a British Scot. I've said this many times and I will keep on saying it, because it's the whole of Britain that I love most dearly of all. It's all one place to me, united and made whole by a history that is deep beyond the reach of memory. Long before there was an England or a Scotland or a Wales, there was a Long Island called Britain, or at least a name that sounded a lot like Britain. Few places have histories longer than ours, histories as rich and complex. This has been a consequence of how much our predecessors achieved. Few nations even attempted to reach so far around the world. British history is long and convoluted on account of how much was accomplished. There's no denying the dynamism of Britain and the British. That those who went before us did so much to shape the modern world means our history is inevitably riven with good and bad, with achievements and with mistakes. So much has been done in our name.
Fantastic, fantastic. British history is long and convoluted on account of how much was accomplished. There is no denying the dynamism of Britain and the British. That those who went before us did so much to shape the modern world means our history is inevitably riven with good and bad, with achievements and with mistakes. So much has been done in our name. And I actually made that exact point in the article that I wrote called 15 Reasons to be Proud to be British, which you'll find there in the link, which was actually, it wasn't an article, it was a speech that I gave in London back in 2018, and Neil Oliver summed that up so well. We put that, we cut that a little bit from his YouTube and we put it on our TikTok, and it's already had about 1,400 views this afternoon. So we're really getting the message out on TikTok, and we do need help to keep TikTok going. So that's why we push our merchandise, that's why we push our Union Supporters Programme, and that's why we thank everybody who keeps us going and who keeps this show on the road. And as I mentioned, there will be out again this month, and we're going to have a packed month in June. More about all that coming up, and that'll be in the programme next week. Now, folks, it's just shortly after the hour. We'll be back next week. Thank you all for your comments. Thank you all for your thoughts. Everything was read, everything was seen. We didn't get an opportunity to flash everything up on the screen, but please do see us next week. And if you're watching on TikTok, the best place to watch us is on youtube.com/UK A Force for Good. So folks, until next week, it just remains for me to say God bless the United Kingdom and God save the Queen. See you next week.